Welcome to You Multicultural channel. Today at the Newcomers Network, I will be talking to Leah Mitchell from Pretty Sky English. Thank you, Leah, for coming.
Thank you for having me, Jocelyn.
I'm so glad to have you here. Leah is an English teacher, and I would like you to introduce yourself.
So my name is Leah Mitchell with Prairie Sky English. I am the owner and lead instructor. So what we do is we help immigrants be successful in the workplace. And we do that by working with the businesses to offer language supports in the workplace, as well as different trainings such as Canadian culture, Canadian expectations, things to help people be successful at work when they're from a different culture.
Wow. So most of the time you are working with immigrants.
Yes.
Yeah. How does it feel like? Different than working with Canadians?
Yeah, so I love it. I've always loved working with different cultures. I love, learning about different languages and people's experiences. My background is in adult education, so I've been in that realm for a long time with helping people upskill so that they can be successful in the workplace. So it was through that. It was a natural progression to come from that to have a more focus in helping immigrants in the workplace. So it's a great job. I love it.
So, we create content for newcomers, and they are over there watching us, and they are hoping to learn from you, from your experience. So can you share some tips for newcomers in terms of how to handle these English barriers at work?
Absolutely. I think that the number one thing people have to realize is that it takes a long time to increase your language skills. For most immigrants, we know that there's 12 levels in the Canadian language benchmarks. Most people won't even get hired till they're at about a Canadian language benchmark of 3 or 4. And that's very entry-level jobs. And most workplaces want their staff to be at least a Canadian language benchmark of 6 or higher. Now, if people want to move into higher positions like management, supervisor, all that, you need about a Canadian language benchmark 7, 8 or higher. So I think a lot of times people don't realize how much language they actually need to be successful in the workplace and how much time it takes. It takes about 500 hours to increase by a level. So when you put that into perspective, 500 hours is a lot of English, right? And if you're at a job where maybe you're using the same phrase. Maybe, for example, you're in a manufacturing position where, you're wearing headphones all day. You're not speaking a lot of English. If you're going home and you're speaking your first language and you're not practicing, maybe you're only getting about a half hour a day at the most, right? It's going to take a long time to improve, especially if you're not putting yourself into positions where you can use English or you're using new vocabulary, right, where you're challenging yourself. So I think a lot of times people don't realize how much work it takes to learn a language and to increase, right? It's not a 1-month thing, right? It can take years.
Yeah. And what do you see your clients, your students, what do you think are those things that they struggle the most?
I think sometimes there's an unrealistic expectation as to how fast the language will come. Right? I always I'm a big believer in language learning has to be realistic and has to be balanced, right? People work, people have families, they have other commitments. And so that's what I really try to do at my business is I'm not expecting people to do 3 hours of English a night, right? And people have to realize that it takes time and a little bit every night is better than nothing, right? So I find sometimes that unrealistic expectation, right? And I think a lot of times too, it can be a big culture shock coming to Canada, right? It's not just the language, it's the culture, it's maybe where you're living, right? If you come from a large city and now you're living in rural Manitoba, that's a big change, right? It's the transportation, the winter driving on, roads that are icy.
You miss your family.
You miss the food, right? And if you're in a small town that's 2 hours away from Winnipeg, it's not always so easy to get stuff, right? That maybe remind you of home and things like that. So I find some of those are probably some of the biggest struggles is that culture shock, how do we settle where we are? And then on top of that, trying to figure out this language And of course, people want to be successful here. They want to start their careers. They want to maybe get their credentials recognized. There's a lot of stress and there's a lot of layers for immigrants when they come here.
Something I was thinking, it's the difference between language and communication. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we have the language, mm-hmm. but it's hard to communicate because we communicate in different ways.
Yes.
And it's, for example, when we are more, for example, I'm coming from the Caribbean, mm-hmm. I'm Latino, and we are very direct. Mm-hmm. And this is something I was telling you, I struggle a lot. Yes. Because the Canadian, it's more indirect. Can you give us some examples?
Yes. So I always talk about small talk and sort of a warm up to a conversation. So, Canadians, for the most part are more indirect. For example, I wouldn't just go into my supervisor's office and ask something. I would go in first. I might ask about their weekend, maybe talk about the weather, things like that. And then I would sort of start talking about what I came in there to talk about. So that's a big, I think, culture shock for many people coming to Canada, is that I sort of look at it as like the gym. You go to the gym and you do like a 5-minute warm up before you do your exercises. And in Canada, in business, you pretty much do a little warm up before you have that conversation that you actually went in to have. And I think another thing a lot of people mentioned to me is just the conversations that strangers will bring up, right? Like, especially in rural Manitoba, I always joke, I said, everyone will say hi to you. Everyone will talk to the weather with you, right? Because that's just what we do. When I go for a walk, I live in a small town. I say hi to everybody that walks by me, right? So just little things like that for different cultures are not usual.
Yeah. For example, offering feedback. This is not okay. Can you change that? You don't do that. You do it different. So this is more direct instead of saying, why don't you try in a different way? What do you think? Like, this is another way that the person is telling you. And that
exactly. And that's exactly how usually it'll be, right? They won't say, don't do that. They'll say, oh, that's interesting. Or, yeah, exactly. Have you thought about trying it this way? Or, usually this is how we do it. Is there a reason you wanted to try it that way, right? It's never exactly very specifically direct, unless maybe it's something super dangerous or something like that. We try to do it very indirectly.
Some of the reasons that sometimes people struggle to find maybe higher level, I don't know if I'm correct, like have higher level positions, mm-hmm. because sometimes you have to talk to clients and to other people. And when you are using this direct communication, it might sound rude, no?
Exactly. And I do think a lot of times some of that stuff can absolutely be a factor. Because if you're being, for example, very direct with your coworkers all the time, then you might not have a great relationship with them. And if you don't have a great relationship with them, your supervisor is going to think, well, I don't want to promote that person, because if they don't have a good relationship with their coworkers, they're not going to be a very good boss or supervisor because the staff aren't going to respect them, right? Mm-hmm. In Canadian culture, it's very much, I always say a lot of times, it's those, your credentials will probably get you the job, but it's those soft skills like communication, working as a team, that's what's going to keep you the job and help you be promoted, right? Lots of people have degrees, but not everyone has the communication skills, the ability, to read body language, to work well as a team, to understand that indirect communication, things that aren't necessarily being spoken.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. And I started to understand that.
Yeah.
A few years ago, but at the beginning, I struggle a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like you're learning a whole new thing, right? It's like going back to school almost, right? And having to learn everything from start.
Yeah. I liked when you told me that your classes are more than English. And can you talk to us? Because
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, like I said, being an adult, we all have lives, right? Everybody has a life outside of work, right? And part of when you come to Canada, it's not just getting a job, it's how do you settle? If you have kids, how do you support them at school? And, if you want to go on a holiday, where do you go? There's so many things to think about when you come to Canada. And if you're working full time and you have commitments in the evening, it's really hard to find time to learn all that other stuff. And especially if you're in a rural community, there's not always a lot of supports for immigrants, right? It really depends on the region that you're in Manitoba, and it depends where those supports are. So what I try to do in my workplace is I try to fuse in those supports as well. So for example, we'll do, I always pick sort of a theme, and then we'll work on that theme, and we'll, incorporate the grammar and all that stuff. So for example, a theme I did in one of my workplaces was winter in Manitoba. So we talked about, activities in Manitoba. We talked about, the different sports, all the kinds of things that you would see in Manitoba. So not only are they learning the language and the grammar, but they're learning, oh, I didn't know that place was in Manitoba. I didn't know you could go here in the winter. Oh, that's a cool place to go to. As well as that, for all my workplaces, I also offer a newsletter, because I find that a lot of places have information for newcomers, but it's not at a basic level. A lot of times people who are writing a lot of this stuff, they don't have the teaching English as an additional language background, so they're writing it at a very high level. If you're a Canadian language benchmark, 2 or 3, that can be really intimidating to read. So what I do is I have a newsletter that I send out monthly to my workplaces and all the employees that I work with, and just has a couple little tips for them, right? So one might be a resource. So for example, March, it's tax season, right? Where can people go to get taxes done for free or at a cheaper cost, right? What are some important dates this month? Well, spring break is coming up. If you're new to Manitoba, you might not realize that your kids are going to be home. Do you have daycare if you need it, right? Or somewhere for them to go? Just little bits, because living here can be overwhelming. And I think the best way to adjust sometimes to new culture is just take a few steps at a time every day, right? I think that's the best advice for learning language, and even just living in a new culture, just a few steps at a time.
Yeah. Sometimes we struggle when we are talking to Canadians because we feel judged.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what will she think about my accent? What if she does not understand? Sometimes I get nervous. I don't find the words. What should that be the feeling, you as a Canadian, that, oh, I'm nervous because I don't sometimes even we understand the other person, but our mind is blocked just because this is a Canadian and speaks very well, and I'm trying to have my perfect English.
You're professional English, right? Yeah. I think it really, most people are very open and just, it doesn't matter, right? I think if you're getting your point across, most people really don't care, right? I think it's more that, and I get it too, right? Because I studied Spanish for a little bit years ago, right? And so I can't quite, but I know that feeling of, oh, I'm going to sound so silly. So then you just don't try, right? But I think that when you come to a new country and you're there, I think you just have to not worry about what people think. I think you just have to go out there and do it, because that's the only way to get better, right? You just have to jump and take that risk. And there might be some people who are not very nice about it, right? And maybe might say, oh, I don't understand. And that's all right. You know what? Probably 90% of people don't care. They're just happy that you're having a conversation. And if you're getting your point across, I say, what does it matter, right? I mean, it's only going to get better. Speaking is the hardest thing to overcome. So the more you speak, the better it's going to be. So you're better off to go out and maybe speak English that isn't perfect than not speak and never improve, right? I think you just have to not worry about what people think. That's hard to say, right?
Yeah.
But I think that, immigrants come here, and I think the strength and resilience people have coming to a new culture and doing all this, right? I think you just gotta jump and do it,
What do you think a non-English speaking person should expect in a Canadian workplace?
I think it really depends on the position that they're coming into and also their experiences in the past, right? So, for example, the biggest advice I would give people in the beginning is when you first start, really just be open to learning, right? Understand that it's going to be different. And those first couple of weeks, you just want to get to know your coworkers. You just want to get to know what's expected of you, right? And to ask questions. I think a lot of times, a lot of feedback I hear as well from workplaces is people might tell someone or be explaining something to someone, right? And the person maybe doesn't quite understand because of the language barrier, but they'll say yes anyway, right? It's really important just to be honest and say, look, I don't understand, right? Can you repeat that? Because managers and bosses would much rather explain it a couple times than think you know what you're doing and then, have something serious happen or a mistake, right? So it's really important just to be open, right, with learning, be open to meeting new people. Another thing I also like to stress is speaking English at work, right? It can be a struggle. I totally understand, right? You're translating your mind to a different language. It's exhausting, totally. And I'm not talking about at lunchtime or breaks, but it's very important because it's Canada and, English is the main language, right? So if you're working and maybe a couple of you speak a similar language, but everyone else speaks English, it's really important that when you're speaking to everyone, or even if you're speaking to someone, let's say, for example, Spanish, right? Let's say you're in a workplace and there's 3 people standing together, 3 people speak Spanish, but 2 other people only speak English, right? It's really important that you're using English so that everyone can understand. And the reason for doing that is that's how you build that rapport with people. That's how because if you're speaking English, then you're giving everyone an opportunity to contribute to the conversation. If you're in a language that not everyone can speak, then you have people feeling left out, and that can cause hurt feelings. It can cause other issues at work, right? I totally get it. And I always tell people, if you have to, during the work hours, speak your other language for a reason, just say, hey, just give me 2 minutes. I just need to translate this, or I don't know the words for this in English. Just give me a minute. I'm just going to speak, and then go back. And like I said, I get it. No one's perfect. It happens, right? And like I said, lunch breaks, things like that. Absolutely. I think it's okay to speak in, but I think when you're working together, just as a way to be inclusive for everyone, right? So that everyone can understand and contribute and things like that.
I would not feel comfortable when 2 people are speaking a language that I don't understand. I shouldn't be speaking my language when other people don't speak it because they might feel the same. It's empathy.
Exactly. And because we're all human and we want to connect, right? And language is how we can connect, right? I might hear you 2 talking about your weekend and then I can contribute. Oh, did you hear about this great place, right? There's just so many missed opportunities to connect with people. Right.
And something I have noticed culturally that the Canadian, it's not that judgmental, like judging you based on what you say or how you say.
Yeah.
And because we're more like that. So I think this is why some of us are so
maybe worried about what people think. Oh, okay. Yeah. I think most of we just like to talk and we like to learn and we like to, and especially, I think, there's a reason our license plate is called Friendly Manitoba, right? I think, I really feel most Manitobans are friendly and genuinely want to help and learn. And, that's why I love my job so much because I love saying, oh, did you hear about this place? Oh, you should try this place out. Or did you know this is happening in your town this week? And you guys go check it out, right? Just, all that kind of stuff.
How can we contact you if we are interested in bringing you to our organization?
Oh, absolutely. So I have a website. It's www.prairieskyeenglish.ca. All my information is there. As well, if anyone's interested in signing up for my newsletter to get those little tidbits about Manitoba, you can actually register for it on my website. As well, people can email me at prairieskyeenglish@gmail.com or connect with me on LinkedIn, Leah Mitchell.
How many people in a company can you have? Like 2, 3, or you have
so
many
classes? I usually do groups of either between 1 and 10 or 11 and 20. So those are kind of the different groups that I work with. But I also do individual. I mean, I always customize to the workplace. So it really just depends.
In person?
Yeah, it's in person. I'm a big believer in person. I mean, I'm not against online. There's absolutely a place for that. But I feel like in person, that's when you get that true interaction, right? And you get to see all those nonverbal cues. And that's when you have all those informal conversations, right? Like it's amazing when you have a group of people in a classroom and then you hear one person talk about something, and then everyone joins in, right? You don't get that online. Right?
And sometimes people get distracted.
Exactly. And then you don't even know what people are listening to you, right? If they're in class, I can see, yeah. But I'm just very much a people person. I like to be talking to people, around people. Yeah, that's...
Are the classes usually during the day or evenings?
So it depends on the workplace. So some workplaces will have them during work hours. Some places will have them right after work. So maybe they finish at 3:30 and I'm there from 3:30 to 5:30, right? So I'm a big believer in as well, making it convenient, right? So like most things, right? If it's easy to get to, you're going to do it, right? So if it's the end of the day, you're already at work, you're going to go to the classes, right? Or if it's during work hours, you're going to do it. So there's lots of different ways that workplaces can incorporate this kind of training into their workplace and really not have it affect the schedule.
So this is good to know. Let's share the good news. I am going to share your website and your email on our platform so people can reach you out for the newsletter. And let's see, because I think some employers don't know about these classes, and I know they might be benefit from them.
Absolutely. I mean, Manitoba is growing, and the truth is there'll never be enough funding to support all language programming. So it's great to see a lot of workplaces thinking outside the box and bringing those supports to their workplace instead, right? Because realistically, if you're working 40 hours a week, it's pretty hard to go to language classes for 3-4 nights in a row for 3 hours, have homework on top of that, and then still have to take care of your family. It's really hard. So that's why a lot of people end up just quitting the English classes because they just don't have the time and there's just so much expected of them. I'm a big believer in that slow growth, right? Most workplaces, I go in once a week for a couple hours. We do the work, minimal homework just to keep them going, and then we connect every week. And so every week they're learning a little bit, right? And then they can use that at work, and then it just gives them more confidence to speak more.
Because sometimes people have most of the skills, but with the English language, it's something that they struggle. And I know the employers need
absolutely
those people working.
Well, and they need to have that language to even move up in positions. I know, and something else that sometimes newcomers struggle with is the interviews, right? And a lot of times in Canada, Manitoba, it's a lot of behavior and situational interviews, right? So you're not just talking about your credentials, you're talking about how you handle different situations, how you would do this or that, and you have to have the language to do that, right? And that takes practice.
Any other challenges that you see your students or immigrants you have the opportunity to share with? You have noticed any other challenges?
Just as well as with when you're looking to move up in positions, people really don't understand how important networking is in Canada. And when I talk about networking, I don't just mean, definitely, absolutely going to different, meetings or groups, right? That's a great way to network. I'm meaning everything. I'm a big believer in volunteering. To me, that's the number one way to network. And the reason being, not only are you networking, but you're gaining skills, right? And those skills you can transfer when you apply for jobs. So if someone's having trouble, let's say getting a job initially, go out and volunteer. I mean, Volunteer Manitoba has a whole website, right? If you've got kids in sports, go help on those sports, right? I've been on the soccer committee of my town for 10 years, and we've never had enough volunteers, right? They're always looking for coaches or people to help coordinate. And those skills, just from meeting those parents, you're going to meet more people, right? And who are going to know other people who can network. I would honestly say probably 85% of the jobs that I've gotten in my life have been from people I knew or people who recommended me to something, right? Rarely do people get jobs, I think, just by their resume alone. It's those networking things. It's those people. And when a lot of times I hear a lot about the Canadian experience, right? I don't have Canadian experience. I don't really think it's Canadian experience. I think it's employers want to know you understand how the Canadian culture in the workplace is, right? And you can get that from volunteering. You can say, I volunteered for these positions. I understand how it works in Canada, right? They just want someone who can vouch for you. And then by doing those volunteering, not only do you have that Canadian workplace experience, now you have people that can speak to your skills in Canada. And that's really what they're looking for. They're just looking for someone who can vouch for you and for some experience in Canada. Doesn't have to be paid.
Yeah, and let's get out of our comfort zone, because I know it's very comfortable when you're eating your food and speaking your language, and like people that you feel very comfortable with.
Exactly.
But let's get out of that box and network. And yes, that's true. As you mentioned at the beginning, sometimes when we talk about networking, people think it's about events. And it's more than that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think too, it always brings in, you volunteer, you're going to speak more English, you're going to get better, right? It's just going to increase, you're giving yourself more hours, you're going to increase your skills because now you're using language that you wouldn't normally use, right? It's a win-win, I think, on all.
Yeah. Some people, they come to Canada and they get into their community and they never get out of there.
Yeah, it's hard, right? It's like you said, you're comfortable, right? It could be, but I think that it's in those areas where you push yourself in all parts of life. That's how you grow, right? You get out of your comfort zone. That's where you grow the most, I think.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you something, but it's kind of a secret question. No, don't worry. Nobody's going to hear that.
All right.
It's easy to get friends with Canadians.
I think it can be tricky, truthfully. And I'll say this for a couple of reasons. I think because we're sort of that polite and we're hard to approach. But it's when we take time to warm up. I think that's the best way to say it. We take time to warm up. And so you have to keep working on us a little bit, right? And honestly, that's how you do that, by, sitting with people at work and chatting with them, right? Getting involved. So for example, if you're in a workplace and everyone's really into something, right? Learn about that so that you can have those conversations with those people as well, right? Or if you're volunteering with a group, right? If everyone is, going to go for a drink after whatever the meeting, try to go for the drink, right? It's a slow, I think making friends with Canadians can sometimes be a slow growth, and I think it's hard too, just from an adult perspective. I think it's harder to make friends as an adult, right? I think most of the time if you're a kid, and you're new, you go to school, you're going to make friends, right? But, you get older, you get stuck in your old ways. It can be harder because I think too, people tend to go out less, right? So it is hard. So I think the best way to kind of make some of those Canadian friends is to do that networking, is to join those different groups. So then you meet people, and then you can kind of meet that way.
And I think everybody's different.
Yeah.
For example, we moved to a new house 2 years ago, and our neighbor went with fruits and candies and a card, welcome, and we're very close.
Yeah.
Like we are like a family, and she's Canadian.
Yeah. Oh, and I absolutely right. I think it's different personalities and totally right, because you'll go to some neighborhoods and people don't even know their neighbors, right?
Yeah.
So that's awesome that you've got it. Yeah.
Yeah. But this is something I have, like, people sometimes struggle to, because, for example, if as a Latina and I meet you, and you're Latina too, I meet you today, let's go for coffee, and tomorrow we meet our house at home, or I go to your house, but with the Canadian it takes like this time to warm up.
It does. Yeah, that's totally true.
Yeah. And sometimes we need to understand that this works different, but don't be afraid. Like, it's okay.
Exactly. It just takes time, right? It's funny you say that, because I know when I lived in Mexico for a while, and when I first went there, just giving the kisses and stuff, right? I'd never known that, right? And you just embrace it and experience it, but it's just learning. It's new, right? It's just learning the new culture and figuring out how to make friends, right?
Yeah, and that's good you mentioned that. Can we talk a little bit about nonverbal?
Yeah, for sure.
Nonverbal communication, but also this physical contact. Because hi, Leah, how are you? And
Yeah.
We hit each other.
Yeah.
Kiss.
Yeah.
Even men and women, and it's something.
And in Canada, we just shake.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that?
I mean, at first, I'm like I said, I love learning about new cultures. So at first, because I just didn't know, so I was like, oh, right, and then you just embrace it, right? I'm very much just jump in, let's learn, and by the time I was done, I was saying it was totally fine, right? I think it's wonderful, I think, but I think that can be a struggle sometimes with Canadians, right? Because we are more formal, we shake hands, or some people don't even shake, right? And it depends on the person, absolutely. But definitely you have to kind of read those nonverbal cues, right? To see how a person is feeling, I guess, in a situation and things like that.
Yeah. Any final tip for our audience?
I heard a quote one time, and I'm not sure who said it, but something I try to live by, and it said, jump and the net will follow. I think you just have to jump in, and it'll work out, right? You might not have the language right away. You might not have the job you want right away. But if you just jump, just keep trying things, it's going to work out. Because like I said, it's when you're out of your comfort zone, that's when you're going to grow the most. And I think as an immigrant, as a newcomer, I think that's the most important thing you can do.
Yeah, that's totally true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Leah, thank you so much for coming with us. I hope you can come back.
Yes, I would love to come
chatting
anytime. Yes, I really enjoyed. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for your time. So thank you, our wonderful audience, for coming with us once again. See you next time, and don't forget to follow us on social media, Multicultural channel. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye-bye.